Last summer, I called my parents in tears, telling them I had to cancel the beach vacation I'd been planning for 8 months because I simply couldn't afford it anymore. My dad's voice was so understanding, so gentle when he said, "Sweetheart, we know exactly how you feel. Money's been incredibly tight for us too lately." 3 weeks later, I found their Hawaii cruise confirmation emails in my mom's forwarded spam folder. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They'd booked a 14-day luxury cruise to 4 Hawaiian islands, complete with ocean view suites and specialty dining packages, scheduled for the exact same week I was supposed to be at that little beach house in Delaware that I'd had to give up. The irony wasn't lost on me that I discovered their secret vacation while helping them set up their new email filters. You know how parents are with technology. My mom had called me in a panic because her inbox was completely broken and she couldn't find anything important. I'd driven over after my shift at the veterinary clinic where I work as a technician, tired and still smelling faintly of antiseptic and dog shampoo, ready to spend my evenings sorting through her digital chaos like I always did. I'm 28 years old, and I've been the family's unofficial IT support since I figured out how to burn CDs in middle school. Every computer problem, every smartphone crisis, every streaming service confusion somehow becomes my responsibility. Not that I minded usually. I actually enjoyed helping them navigate the digital world. It made me feel useful, needed, like I had something valuable to contribute to our family dynamic. My name is Jessica, though everyone calls me Jess, and I've always been the practical one in our family. While my older brother Marcus pursued his dream of becoming a professional photographer, traveling to exotic locations for destination weddings and fashion shoots, I chose the steady path. I went to community college for 2 years, then transferred to finish my degree in animal science. I found a job I loved at Dr. Peterson's clinic, where I got to work with animals every day and help worried pet owners feel better about their furry family members. It wasn't glamorous work. I spent my days restraining anxious cats for blood draws, cleaning kennels, explaining medication schedules to elderly dog owners, and occasionally getting bitten by nervous puppies. But it was honest work, meaningful work, and it paid enough for me to rent a small apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery in the older part of town. The smell of fresh bread and pastries drifted up through my floorboards every morning, and I'd gotten used to the early morning sounds of delivery trucks and the industrial mixers starting up at 4 a.m. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't poor either. I lived within my means, mostly. I drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic that I'd bought from a coworker when she upgraded. I shopped at discount grocery stores and clipped coupons like my grandmother taught me. I bought my clothes at thrift stores and outlet malls, and I'd gotten pretty good at making a dollar stretch. The one luxury I allowed myself was a small vacation fund that I contributed to every month, religiously, like it was a bill I had to pay. For 3 years, I'd been putting away $50 every month into a savings account I called my escape fund. It started as a joke, really. After particularly stressful days at work, I'd come home and transfer money to that account while muttering about needing to escape somewhere tropical. But over time it became real. It became a goal, a light at the end of the tunnel during rough weeks when I had to euthanize someone's beloved pet or deal with an owner who couldn't afford necessary treatment for their sick animal. By last spring, I'd saved nearly $2,000. It wasn't enough for anything extravagant, but it was enough for a nice beach vacation. I'd found a charming little rental house in Bethany Beach, Delaware, just 2 blocks from the ocean. It wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen, and a screened porch that looked like it had seen better decades. But it was available for a full week in August, and the price was right. I could practically hear the waves calling my name when I looked at the photos online. I'd planned everything meticulously. I requested the vacation days from work 6 months in advance. I researched the best local restaurants, found a used bookstore I wanted to visit, mapped out the quietest stretches of beach for early morning walks. I even bought a new swimsuit and a stack of paperback novels I'd been meaning to read. This was going to be my year, my escape, my reward for 3 years of careful saving and responsible adulting. But then life happened, the way it always does. In June, my landlord announced that the building had been sold and my rent was increasing by $400 a month starting in August. $400. Just like that, my comfortable budget became impossible, and my vacation fund suddenly looked like a security deposit for a new apartment. I spent weeks apartment hunting, driving around after work and on weekends, calling numbers from Craigslist ads and Facebook Marketplace posts. Everything decent was either too expensive or too far from work. The few places I could afford were either in questionable neighborhoods or came with roommate situations that made me nervous. I'm pretty independent, but I'm also cautious about living with strangers, especially after hearing too many horror stories from friends who'd had bad roommate experiences. The stress was eating away at me. I started losing sleep, lying in bed calculating and recalculating my budget, trying to find money that simply wasn't there. I loved my job, but veterinary technicians don't make Fortune 500 wages. After taxes and health insurance, my take-home pay was enough to live on, but not enough to absorb a sudden $400 monthly increase without making significant sacrifices. The vacation was the obvious sacrifice. It hurt, physically hurt, to cancel that reservation. I'd been looking forward to those 7 days of freedom for months. I could already picture myself sitting on that screened porch with morning coffee, watching the sunrise over the ocean, feeling sand between my toes, reading novels without any interruptions from ringing phones or barking dogs or worried pet owners. When I called to cancel, the property manager was understanding but firm about the cancellation policy. I'd lose my deposit, $200, but I could get the rest back minus a processing fee. It stung, but it was better than losing the full amount. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store after making that call, and I cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears of disappointment and frustration. That's when I decided to call my parents. I needed someone to understand, someone to remind me that sometimes life requires difficult choices, and that I was being responsible even if it didn't feel good. My parents had always been my sounding board for major decisions. They'd supported me through school, celebrated my job offers, and commiserated with me through various life challenges. My mom answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetie, how are you doing?" Her voice had that warm maternal tone that could usually make me feel better no matter what was wrong. "Not great, Mom," I admitted, still sitting in my car. I had to cancel my beach vacation. My rent's going up by $400, and I just can't swing both. I'm really disappointed. There was a pause, then my dad's voice joined the conversation. They'd put me on speaker. "Oh honey, we're so sorry to hear that," he said. "We know how much you were looking forward to that trip." "We absolutely understand," my mom chimed in. "Money's been incredibly tight for us too lately. Your father's been stressed about it constantly. Sometimes life just forces these hard choices on us." My dad made a sound of agreement. "It's been rough, sweetheart. Really rough. We've had to cut back on so many things ourselves. But you're being smart about it, prioritizing housing over vacation. We're proud of you for making the mature choice." Their understanding made me feel somewhat better, less alone in my disappointment. "Thanks," I said, wiping my eyes with a tissue from the glove compartment. I just needed to hear someone else say it was the right choice, even though it sucks. "It absolutely sucks," my mom agreed. "But this is what being a responsible adult looks like sometimes. You should be proud of yourself." We talked for a few more minutes about my apartment search and their suggestions for neighborhoods I might not have considered. They offered to help me move when I found a new place, and my dad even suggested I could stay in their guest room temporarily, if I needed to. It was exactly what I needed to hear, that support system reminding me I wasn't facing this challenge completely alone. After we hung up, I felt better. Still disappointed, still stressed about finding housing I could afford, but better. My parents understood, because they were going through their own financial struggles. We were all in this together, all making tough choices and prioritizing necessities over wants. I threw myself into apartment hunting with renewed energy. I expanded my search radius, considered smaller places, looked at apartments that needed a little work but had lower rent. Eventually I found something workable. It wasn't perfect, A studio apartment in a converted house, about 15 minutes further from work than I'd prefer, but it was clean, safe, and exactly at my budget limit. The moving process was exhausting. I'd underestimated how much stuff I'd accumulated in 3 years of living above the bakery. My parents came through on their promise to help, showing up with my dad's pickup truck and a couple of folding dollies he'd borrowed from a neighbor. We spent an entire Saturday hauling boxes and furniture down narrow stairs and across town to my new place. By evening, we were all exhausted but satisfied. My new studio was small but cozy, with hardwood floors and big windows that let in plenty of light. My parents had brought sandwiches from a deli near their house, and we sat on my couch eating dinner and laughing about the day's moving mishaps. My dad had gotten stuck in the narrow stairway with my dresser, and my mom had accidentally packed her reading glasses in one of my book boxes and spent 20 minutes searching for them. "This place has good energy," my mom declared, looking around at my organized chaos. "I think you're going to be happy here." "It's definitely cozy," I agreed. "And hey, shorter commute than some of the other places I looked at." That was a slight exaggeration, but I was trying to stay positive. As they were getting ready to leave, my dad pulled me aside. "We know this wasn't easy for you, giving up that vacation and moving to a more expensive place. We're really proud of how you handled everything." "Thanks, Dad. I'm just glad it worked out." "And who knows," my mom added, overhearing us, "maybe next year you'll be able to plan something even better." I smiled and hugged them both goodbye. Maybe so. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new routine. The studio apartment grew on me. It was actually kind of nice having everything in one space, and I got creative with storage solutions and furniture arrangement. I found a cute coffee shop within walking distance where I could go on weekends when the small space felt too confining. My commute to work was manageable, and I was slowly building up my savings again after the moving expenses. The only thing that nagged at me was how quiet my parents had been lately. Usually we talked 2 or 3 times a week, but our conversations had become shorter and less frequent since I'd moved. When I did talk to them, they seemed distracted, less engaged than usual. I attributed it to stress. They'd mentioned money being tight, and I knew financial pressure could make people withdraw a little, become more focused on their own immediate concerns. I didn't think much about it until my mom called with her email crisis. She was nearly in tears on the phone, convinced that something was seriously wrong with her computer because she couldn't find important emails, and everything seemed to be going to the wrong folders. "I think I might have accidentally deleted something crucial," she said, sounding panicked. "Your father's going to be so upset if I lost those insurance documents we needed." "Mom, take a deep breath," I said, already reaching for my car keys. "I'm sure everything's fine. Email doesn't just disappear. I'll come over and help you figure it out." "Oh, would you? I know you just got off work, but I've been stressing about this all day." "Of course, give me 20 minutes. I grabbed a quick dinner from a drive-thru and headed to their house, which was about a 30-minute drive from my new apartment. My parents live in a modest ranch house in a neighborhood that was built in the 70s, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors and people still leave their porch lights on for trick-or-treaters. They'd bought the house when I was in elementary school, and it still felt like home to me even though I'd been living on my own for years. My mom met me at the door, looking frazzled. "Thank goodness you're here. I've been afraid to touch anything since this morning, when everything went haywire." I followed her to the small office space they'd set up in what used to be a den. Their computer setup was basic but functional, and my mom had sticky notes with various passwords scattered around the monitor. I'd been telling them for years to use a password manager, but they insisted on their paper system. "Okay, show me what's happening," I said, settling into the desk chair. She hovered behind me, pointing at the screen. "See, when I click on my inbox, there's barely anything there. But yesterday there were dozens of emails. They've just vanished." I clicked around for a few minutes, checking different folders and settings. It didn't take long to figure out the issue. Somehow, her spam filter had been set to extremely aggressive settings, and legitimate emails were being automatically sorted into different folders, or marked as spam. "Mom, your emails aren't gone," I said, opening the spam folder. "They're just being filtered incorrectly. See, here's everything." Her relief was immediate and dramatic. "Oh, thank goodness. I was imagining having to tell your father that I'd lost important tax documents or insurance information." I spent the next hour helping her sort through the filtered emails and adjust her spam settings so this wouldn't happen again. Most of it was routine stuff. Newsletters, promotional emails from stores, appointment confirmations. But as I was moving emails back to her inbox, I noticed something that made me pause. There, buried in the spam folder, between a discount furniture ad and a newsletter from her doctor's office, was an email with the subject line, "Cruise confirmation, Hawaii adventure awaits." The sender was from Premier Cruise Lines, and it was dated 3 weeks ago. I stared at the screen for a moment, sure I was misreading something. My parents had talked about wanting to take a cruise someday, the way people talk about winning the lottery or retiring early, as a pleasant fantasy that might happen eventually, but probably wouldn't. But this looked very much like a real confirmation email. "Mom," I said carefully, "what's this email about a cruise?" She leaned over my shoulder to see what I was pointing at, and I watched her face change. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like panic. "Oh, that," she said, her voice suddenly sounding different, more careful. "That's just..."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We were looking at cruises online, and sometimes these companies send you fake confirmation emails to try to get you to book with them. You know how aggressive their marketing is. That made sense, I suppose, but something about her tone bothered me. Should I delete it then? Yes. Definitely delete it. It's just spam. I moved my mouse toward the delete button, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the email to open it instead. What I saw made my stomach drop. It wasn't a marketing email. It was a real confirmation for a 14-day Hawaii cruise departing in 2 weeks. 2 ocean view suites on the Emerald deck, specialty dining packages, shore excursions in Maui, Kauai, and the Big Island. The total cost, listed clearly at the bottom of the email, was over $8,000. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. $8,000. $8,000 for a vacation. When 3 weeks ago my dad had told me how tight money was for them lately, how they understood my disappointment about canceling my beach trip because they were struggling with finances too. "Jess," my mom said behind me, her voice small, "can you delete that now?" I turned around to look at her. She was standing with her arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. "Mom, this looks real, like a real booking confirmation." She was quiet for a long moment, then she sighed. "It is real. You booked a cruise to Hawaii." "Yes." "For $8,000. "Yes." I felt like the room was spinning a little. "But when I called about canceling my vacation, you said money was tight. You said you understood because you were struggling financially too." My mom sat down in the armchair next to the desk. She looked tired suddenly, and older than I usually thought of her. "We are struggling in a way, not with day-to-day expenses, but with saving for retirement. Your father's worried we're behind where we should be for our age. So you booked an $8,000 cruise. It's complicated, honey." "How is it complicated?" I could hear my voice getting sharper, but I couldn't help it. "I canceled my vacation because I couldn't afford it. And you told me you understood because money was tight, but you'd already booked this cruise. We didn't want to make you feel worse about your situation by lying to me." She flinched at the word lying. "By not mentioning our vacation when you were upset about yours." I stared at the confirmation email again. 14 days in Hawaii. Ocean view suites. They were going to be sailing around tropical islands, while I worked my regular schedule at the clinic, still settling into my studio apartment. Still rebuilding my vacation fund from zero. "When did you book this?" I asked. "A few months ago. It was a good deal, and your father said we should treat ourselves for our anniversary." A few months ago. They'd booked this cruise months ago, knew they were taking this expensive vacation, and when I called them crying about having to cancel my much smaller, much cheaper beach trip, they'd told me they understood because money was tight for them too. I felt something cold settling in my chest. A combination of hurt and anger that I wasn't sure how to process. "Mom, my beach house was going to cost me $800 total. Your cruise cost 10 times that. I know it seems unfair. It doesn't seem unfair. It is unfair."
Not that you get to take a nice vacation, but that you lied to me when I needed support. You made me feel like we were all in the same boat, struggling with the same problems. We didn't mean to make you feel bad, but you did. And more than that, you were dishonest with me when I was vulnerable and upset." My mom was quiet, looking down at her hands. After a moment she said, "I'm sorry. You're right, we should have been honest." I closed the email and turned away from the computer. "I need to think about this. Jess, please don't be angry. We love you, and we hated that you had to cancel your trip. We just didn't know how to tell you about ours without making you feel worse. So instead you decided to lie and make me feel like my problems were normal, like everyone was struggling the same way I was." I gathered my things and headed toward the door. My mom followed me, looking distressed. "Please don't leave like this. Can we talk about it?" "I don't know what to say right now, Mom. I need some time to process this." As I drove home, I kept replaying the conversation with them from 3 weeks ago. How understanding they'd sounded, how they'd commiserated with my disappointment, how my dad had talked about money being really rough for them lately. How supported I'd felt, knowing that other people I loved were making similar difficult choices. But they hadn't been making difficult choices. They'd been planning a luxury vacation while I was giving up my small, modest beach trip. They'd let me feel alone in my financial struggles when they could have been honest about their different circumstances. They could have been sympathetic without pretending to share my problems. By the time I got back to my studio apartment, I was exhausted emotionally. I sat on my couch, looking around at my small space, thinking about how proud I'd been of handling my housing crisis responsibly, how mature my parents had said I was being, prioritizing needs over wants. Meanwhile, they'd been secretly planning to sail around Hawaii in ocean view suites, with specialty dining packages. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the deception itself or the realization that they saw my financial situation as something to be managed rather than shared. That when I called them upset and needing support, their first instinct had been to hide their good fortune, rather than be honest about the differences in our circumstances. I understood not wanting to make me feel worse. I could even understand not mentioning the cruise at all during that conversation, but actively lying, claiming their own financial struggles, making me feel like we were all facing the same challenges, that felt different, that felt like they'd prioritized their own comfort over my right to understand the reality of our family's situation. I made myself some tea and sat by the window watching the sunset and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. Part of me wanted to call them back and have a real conversation about what had happened. Part of me wanted to ignore it and pretend I'd never seen that email. And part of me was curious about what other things they might not have been entirely honest about. The cruise was departing in 2 weeks. They'd been planning to leave town for 14 days, without mentioning where they were going, or why. What would they have told me when I tried to reach them? That they were visiting relatives. That they were dealing with some family emergency. I realized I didn't actually know how they'd planned to handle their absence, and that bothered me almost as much as the initial deception. It suggested a level of planning around the lie that made it feel more deliberate, more calculated than a simple omission. As I got ready for bed that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to bring it up immediately, but I wasn't going to pretend I didn't know either. I was going to pay attention, see how they handled the situation, see if they chose honesty or continued deception when their departure date approached. Maybe it would tell me something important about how they saw me and how they saw our relationship. Maybe it would help me understand whether this was an isolated incident of misguided protectiveness or part of a larger pattern I'd been too trusting to notice. What I didn't expect was how much that decision would change everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Every conversation with my parents felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every casual phone call became an exercise in detection. I found myself analyzing their words, looking for clues about how they planned to handle their upcoming disappearance, wondering if they would finally tell me the truth or continue weaving lies around their Hawaiian adventure. They called me 3 days after I'd discovered the cruise confirmation, just a normal evening check-in that had become routine since I'd moved to the studio apartment. My mom asked about my day at the clinic, and I told her about a particularly difficult case involving a senior dog with diabetes, whose owner couldn't afford the ongoing treatment costs. It was the kind of story that usually prompted sympathy from both my parents, understanding nods about the harsh realities of veterinary medicine and economic hardship. "That's so sad," my mom said. "It must be hard seeing people struggle with those kinds of decisions." "It is," I agreed, watching my face in the darkened window reflection as I spoke. "Especially when you know how much they love their pets, but just can't make the numbers work." "We really admire what you do," my dad chimed in from the background. "Taking care of animals and their families during difficult times. It takes a special kind of person." I almost laughed at the irony. Here they were, praising me for helping people through financial struggles, while actively concealing their own comfortable financial situation. "Thanks, Dad. Sometimes I wonder if I'm really making a difference, when I see how money problems affect every aspect of people's lives." "Of course you're making a difference," my mom said firmly. "Don't let the hard cases discourage you." We talked for another 20 minutes about work, my apartment, the weather. Normal family conversation that felt completely surreal, given what I knew and what they didn't know I knew. When we hung up, I sat in my tiny kitchen, staring at my phone and wondering how long they could maintain this charade. The answer came sooner than I expected. 5 days before their cruise departure, my mom called with what she clearly thought was a brilliant cover story. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the forced casualness in her voice immediately. "I wanted to let you know that your father and I are going to be out of town for a couple weeks. His sister in Portland has been having some health issues, and we decided we should go help her out." I felt my chest tighten. Dad's sister Margaret lived in Portland, Oregon, and she was in her 70s with some mobility issues, so the story wasn't completely implausible. But the timing was too perfect, and my mom's tone was too rehearsed. "Oh no," I said, trying to match her casual tone. "Is Aunt Margaret okay? What kind of health issues?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Well, she's been having trouble getting around, and she needs some help organizing her house. You know how she's always been a bit of a pack rat. We thought we'd go help her declutter and make sure she's got everything she needs." "That's really nice of you both," I said. "When are you leaving?" "This weekend. We'll probably be gone about 2 weeks, maybe a little longer depending on how much work needs to be done." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. This weekend was exactly when their cruise departed. 2 weeks was exactly how long their Hawaiian adventure would last. They'd crafted a lie that perfectly matched their actual travel schedule, while making themselves look like caring siblings instead of vacationing retirees. "Do you want me to check on the house while you're gone?" I offered, curious to see how far they'd take this deception. "Oh, that would be wonderful," my mom said, sounding genuinely relieved. "Could you maybe stop by every few days, bring in the mail, make sure everything looks lived in? You know how neighborhoods can get when houses look empty." "Of course." "Do you have Aunt Margaret's number? I might want to check in on how you're all doing." Another pause. "Well, she's been pretty overwhelmed lately, so maybe it's better if you just text us directly if you need anything. We don't want to stress her out with too many phone calls." I had to give them credit for thinking through the logistics, but every additional lie made me feel more betrayed. "That makes sense. Well, give her my love, and let me know if there's anything else I can do to help." After we hung up, I sat on my couch, feeling like I'd just participated in some kind of elaborate theater performance. They'd created an entire fictional scenario to cover their tracks, complete with logical explanations for why I couldn't contact them directly. It was so much more complicated than just not mentioning the cruise. This level of deception suggested they'd put serious thought into how to hide their vacation from me. I spent that evening researching Premier Cruise Lines and their Hawaiian itinerary, trying to understand exactly where my parents would be, while pretending to help Aunt Margaret in Portland. The ship would depart from Los Angeles, spend 2 days at sea, then visit 4 different Hawaiian islands over the course of 10 days before returning to the mainland. The specialty dining packages they'd purchased included meals at restaurants with names like Ocean's Edge and Pacific Sunset Grill. The shore excursions offered everything from helicopter tours of volcanic landscapes to snorkeling adventures in coral reefs. It sounded like the kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience that I would have been genuinely happy for them to enjoy, if only they'd been honest about it. That weekend, I drove to their house as promised to start my house-sitting duties. They'd left a detailed list of instructions on the kitchen counter, written in my mom's careful handwriting. Water the plants on Tuesdays and Fridays. Bring in the mail daily. Check that the back door is locked. Move the cars occasionally so it looks like someone's home. At the bottom of the list, she'd written, "Thank you so much for helping out while we help Margaret. You're the best daughter anyone could ask for." The guilt in that final sentence was palpable, but it didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse knowing that she was aware enough of the deception to feel bad about it, but not aware enough to simply tell the truth. I watered their plants and collected their mail, feeling like an accomplice to my own deception. Their mail slot was full of the usual assortment of bills, catalogs, and promotional materials, but there was also an envelope from Premier Cruise Lines with boarding information enclosed printed on the outside. I stood in their living room holding evidence of their lie, wondering what I was supposed to do with the knowledge that my parents trusted me enough to care for their house, but not enough to be honest about where they were going. The first few days of their absence were relatively normal. I stopped by every other day, took care of the basic house maintenance, and tried not to think too much about what they were doing. But by day 4, curiosity got the better of me. I found myself checking the cruise line's website, looking at photos from previous Hawaiian voyages, reading reviews from passengers who'd taken similar trips. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. People raved about the ocean views, the quality of the food, the professionalism of the staff. One reviewer had written, "This was the trip of a lifetime. We celebrated our 30th anniversary on this cruise, and every single day was more beautiful than the last." The sunset dinners on the specialty restaurant deck were absolutely magical. Another review mentioned how perfect the weather had been, how clear the water was for snorkeling, how friendly the other passengers were. I found myself feeling genuinely happy for my parents, imagining them enjoying these experiences together. And that made the deception hurt even more, because it confirmed that this wasn't about money at all. This was about them not trusting me enough to share their joy, not believing I could be supportive of their good fortune even while dealing with my own more modest circumstances. On day 6 of their supposed Portland visit, I got a text from my mom. "Everything going well with Margaret. She's making progress on organizing her bedroom. How are things at the house?" I stared at the text for a long time before responding. "House is fine, all plants watered, mail collected, glad to hear Aunt Margaret is doing well." What I really wanted to text was, "How's the weather in Hawaii?" or "Are you enjoying the specialty dining?" But I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. I was still trying to understand my own feelings about the situation. 2 days later, another text. "Margaret's doctor appointment went well today. We might be able to come home a few days earlier than expected." I looked up the cruise itinerary online. They were scheduled to dock in Maui that day. The weather forecast for Maui showed sunny skies and 82 degrees. I wondered if they were taking one of their shore excursions or just enjoying the ship's amenities. "That's great news." I texted back. "Give her my love." The cognitive dissonance of maintaining this false conversation while knowing the truth was exhausting. Every text exchange felt like a small betrayal, a collaborative fiction that we were all participating in for reasons that were becoming less clear to me by the day. On day 10, I decided to call Aunt Margaret directly. I told myself I was just checking on her welfare, being a concerned niece, but honestly I wanted to see how far my parents had taken their lie. Did Margaret know she was supposed to be hosting my parents? Had they asked her to cover for them, or was she completely unaware that she was their fictional excuse for a Hawaiian vacation? Margaret answered on the 3rd ring, sounding surprised but pleased to hear from me. "Jessica, what a lovely surprise. How are you doing, sweetie?" "I'm doing well, Aunt Margaret. I was just calling to check on you. Mom said you've been having some health issues lately." There was a pause. "Health issues? Well, my arthritis has been acting up with all this rain we've been having, but nothing serious. Why is your mother worried about something?" My heart sank. "Oh, she just mentioned that you might need some help around the house. I think she was considering coming out to visit you." "That would be wonderful," Margaret said, sounding genuinely excited. "I haven't seen your parents in almost a year. When was she thinking of coming?" I felt sick. "I'm not sure of the exact timing. I might have misunderstood." I'll have her call you to work out the details. Please do, I'd love to see them both, and you should come too if you can get time off work. It's been too long since we've had family visit. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd learned. Not only had my parents lied to me about their vacation, but they'd also created a fictional emergency involving a family member who had no idea she was supposed to be in crisis. Margaret wasn't expecting them, wasn't in need of help, wasn't even aware that she was the cover story for their deception. The level of calculation involved was staggering. They'd chosen Margaret because she lived far enough away to be plausible, but not so far that it would seem unusual for them to drive there. They'd picked a vague health issue that sounded serious enough to require extended help, but not so serious that I'd be expected to send flowers or call frequently. They'd even anticipated my offer to house sit and prepared detailed instructions to make their absence seem legitimate. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to avoid hurting my feelings. This was a carefully planned deception that involved multiple layers of lies and potentially implicated an innocent relative who had no idea her name was being used to cover up a luxury vacation. I realized I was angry now in a way I hadn't been before. The initial hurt of discovering the cruise had been about feeling excluded and lied to. This was about recognizing that my parents had fundamentally misunderstood both me and the situation. They'd assumed I couldn't handle the truth, that I was so fragile and self-centered that learning about their good fortune would somehow destroy me. But more than that, they'd assumed I was someone who needed to be managed and manipulated rather than trusted and respected. They'd decided I was the kind of person who would begrudge them their happiness, who would make their vacation about my own disappointment, who couldn't be counted on to respond maturely to honest information about our different financial circumstances. That night, I called my brother Marcus. We didn't talk frequently, maybe once a month, but we'd always been honest with each other. He was traveling for work, shooting a wedding in Colorado, but he had some time to talk while he waited for the reception to start. "Hey Jess, what's up? You sound weird. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Have Mom and Dad said anything to you about money being tight lately?" Money being tight? No, why would they? Dad just bought that new riding mower he'd been wanting, and Mom's been talking about redecorating the guest room. They seem fine financially. Why? I told him the whole story, starting with my canceled vacation and ending with the discovery of the cruise confirmation and the fake Portland story. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or disapproval. "Wow," he said when I finished. That's really messed up, Jess. I mean, I understand not wanting to make you feel bad about the vacation thing, but lying about helping Margaret, that's just wrong. Have they ever done anything like this before? Lied about where they were going, or what they were doing?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Not exactly like this, but remember last year when they said they couldn't help me with the down payment for my new camera equipment because they were dealing with some unexpected house repairs? Yeah, you ended up getting a loan instead. Right, but then like a month later, I saw pictures on Facebook of that long weekend they took in Napa Valley. The same weekend they said they'd be dealing with contractors and repair estimates. I felt my stomach drop. They went to Napa Valley, yeah, some fancy wine tasting tour. They posted pictures from this expensive-looking resort. I never said anything because I figured maybe the repairs got postponed or something, but the timing was weird. Marcus, that's exactly what they did to me. They made it sound like we were all struggling with money when they were planning expensive vacations. I think Marcus said carefully, they might have some kind of weird guilt about spending money on themselves, so they pretend they don't have it when we need help. But that's so backwards. I would never expect them to not take vacations just because I had to cancel mine. I just wanted honesty about our different situations. And the lying makes it so much worse, because then it becomes this whole thing instead of just, "Hey, we're sorry you had to cancel your trip, but we hope you understand that we're still taking ours." Talking to Marcus clarified something important for me. This wasn't an isolated incident of misguided protectiveness. This was a pattern of behavior where my parents chose deception over honest communication whenever money was involved. They'd rather create elaborate fictional scenarios than have straightforward conversations about financial differences and family boundaries. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to confront them when they get back, but part of me is curious to see how far they'll take the Portland story. You could always send them a postcard from Margaret, Marcus suggested with a laugh. Tell them you hope they're enjoying helping her organize her closets while you're tracking their cruise ship online. The idea was tempting, but I wasn't ready for that level of confrontation yet. I think I need to understand why they felt like lying was better than truth. Like, what did they think would happen if they just told me they were taking a cruise? Probably that you'd be hurt or jealous or something, but I wouldn't have been. I mean, I might have felt a little envious, but I would have been happy for them too. That's what normal families do, right? Support each other's good fortune even when your own situation is less ideal. Normal families do, yeah. But maybe mom and dad don't realize you're that kind of person. Maybe they think you're more fragile or self-centered than you actually are. That possibility bothered me more than the lying itself. If my parents had such a low opinion of my emotional maturity that they felt elaborate deceptions were necessary to protect me from the knowledge of their happiness, then we had bigger problems than just this vacation situation. The next few days passed slowly. I continued my house-sitting duties, collecting mail and watering plants, while knowing that my parents were probably enjoying Mai Tais on a tropical beach. I got 2 more texts from my mom with updates on Margaret's progress, and thanks for taking care of the house. Each message felt like a small slap in the face. On day 12 of their trip, something interesting happened. I was at their house collecting mail when their next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, came over to chat. She's a sweet elderly woman who's lived on their street for 30 years and knows everyone's business. "How are your parents enjoying their cruise?" she asked pleasantly while I stood there holding their mail. I blinked. Their cruise? Oh yes, they were so excited about it. Your mother showed me the brochures weeks ago. Hawaii, wasn't it? Such a romantic way to celebrate their anniversary. I felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. Yes, I managed. Hawaii. 14 days, she said. I'm sure they're having a wonderful time. The weather's been perfect out there lately. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled warmly. It's so nice when couples their age can still take trips like that together. You're a good daughter watching the house for them while they're gone.
After she went back inside, I stood on my parents' front porch, staring at their mail and trying to process what had just happened. They'd told their neighbor the truth about their vacation. Mrs. Rodriguez knew exactly where they were and how long they'd be gone. My parents had shared their excitement about the cruise with someone, just not with me. This revelation changed everything. It meant the deception wasn't about privacy or general discretion. It was specifically about hiding their vacation from me. They'd felt comfortable sharing their joy with their neighbor, but not with their own daughter. They trusted Mrs. Rodriguez to be happy for them, but they assumed I would react badly. I drove home that day feeling like I'd discovered something fundamental about how my parents viewed me, and it wasn't flattering. In their minds, I was apparently the kind of person who couldn't be trusted with good news, who would make their happiness about my own disappointment, who needed to be managed and manipulated rather than treated as a capable adult. That evening, I made a decision. When they returned from their cruise, I was going to confront them about the deception, not angrily, not dramatically, but honestly. I was going to ask them why they thought lying was better than truth, why they'd involved innocent relatives in their fictional cover story, and why they trusted their neighbor with information they couldn't trust me with. But first, I had 2 more days to think about how I wanted that conversation to go, and what I hoped to accomplish by having it. Because once I revealed that I knew about their Hawaiian adventure, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction we'd all been maintaining. Our relationship would have to be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty, or it would crumble under the weight of accumulated lies. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I was going to document everything I knew about their trip, not to punish them but to show them exactly how elaborate their deception had become. I was going to print out the cruise itinerary, save screenshots of their texts about Margaret, and write down everything Mrs. Rodriguez had told me. I wanted them to understand the full scope of what they'd done, because I wasn't sure they realized how far their simple desire to not make me feel bad had spiraled into something much more problematic. As I compiled my evidence, I found myself feeling sad more than angry. This level of deception suggested that my parents and I had fundamentally different ideas about love, trust, and family communication. In my mind, love meant honesty even when it was uncomfortable. Trust meant sharing both good news and bad,
And family meant supporting each other through different circumstances without pretending those circumstances didn't exist. In their minds, apparently love meant protecting me from information they thought would hurt me, trust meant I couldn't be counted on to handle the truth maturely, and family meant maintaining harmony through whatever deceptions were necessary. We were going to have to figure out which version of family we wanted to be going forward, because the current version built on lies and assumptions clearly wasn't working for any of us. My parents returned on a Thursday evening, and I could hear it in my mom's voice immediately when she called. There was a lightness there that hadn't been present in weeks, the unmistakable sound of someone who'd just spent 2 weeks being pampered and relaxed. "Hi, sweetheart, we're back," she said, and I could practically hear her smile through the phone. "Margaret is doing so much better. We got her whole house organized and she's feeling much more confident about managing on her own." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "That's wonderful, Mom. I'm sure she appreciated all your help." "She did. And thank you so much for taking care of the house. Everything looked perfect when we got home. You're such a thoughtful daughter." The guilt in her voice was even more pronounced now, probably amplified by whatever amazing experiences she'd just had. I wondered if she'd felt bad about lying to me while watching Hawaiian sunsets, or if the deception had been easier to maintain when she was distracted by tropical adventures. "I'm glad I could help," I said. "Did you have a good drive back from Portland?" "Oh yes, very smooth. The weather was perfect the whole way." Another lie delivered so easily that it made me wonder how many other casual deceptions had peppered our conversations over the years without me noticing. We made plans to have dinner together on Saturday, so they could tell me more about their trip to Portland and I could update them on everything that had happened while they were away. I spent Friday rehearsing different versions of the conversation I planned to have with them, trying to find the right balance between honesty and kindness. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, which somehow felt appropriate for the emotional weather I was expecting. I drove to their house, carrying a folder containing everything I'd compiled over the past 2 weeks. Cruise itineraries, screenshots of text messages, notes from my conversation with Marcus, and a written summary of what Mrs. Rodriguez had told me. I felt like a lawyer preparing for trial, which wasn't the dynamic I wanted with my parents, but I needed them to understand the full scope of their deception. They greeted me at the door with hugs and smiles, both looking notably tan for people who had supposedly spent 2 weeks indoors helping organize closets in rainy Oregon. My dad's face had that particular kind of healthy glow that comes from ocean air and sunshine, and my mom was wearing a new bracelet with small shells that looked suspiciously Hawaiian. "You both look really rested," I said, settling into their living room where we usually had our serious family conversations. "Well, it was good to get away," my dad said. "Even though we were there to help Margaret, we managed to get some relaxation time too." My mom nodded enthusiastically. The weather was surprisingly nice for Portland this time of year. We even got to take some walks around her neighborhood. I watched them carefully as they continued building on their fictional narrative, adding details about Margaret's imaginary progress and the supposedly beautiful Oregon weather. They seemed so committed to the story that I almost wondered if they'd convinced themselves it was true. "That sounds lovely," I said, finally. "Before we talk more about your trip, there's something I need to discuss with you both." Something in my tone must have alerted them because their relaxed expressions shifted slightly, becoming more cautious. "Of course, honey," my mom said. "What's on your mind?" I pulled out my folder and set it on the coffee table between us. "I know you weren't in Portland helping Aunt Margaret. I know you went on a cruise to Hawaii." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked at each other, then at me, then at the folder on the table. My dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, resignation, and something that might have been relief. "How did you?" my mom started, then stopped. "I found the cruise confirmation email when I was helping you with your spam folder 3 weeks ago," I said quietly. "The one you told me to delete because it was fake marketing." My mom's face crumpled. "Oh God, Jess, I'm so sorry. I also called Aunt Margaret to check on her health issues," I continued. "She has no idea what I was talking about. She hasn't seen you in almost a year, and she was excited about the possibility of a visit that was never going to happen." My dad rubbed his forehead with both hands. "We never meant for it to get so complicated. And Mrs. Rodriguez told me you showed her the cruise brochures weeks ago. She knew exactly where you were going and how long you'd be gone. She was happy for you and excited about your anniversary celebration. The folder sat unopened on the table, but its presence seemed to loom large in the room. My parents stared at it like it contained evidence of crimes rather than just documentation of their lies. We can explain, my mom said weakly. I hope so, I said, because I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to understand why you thought lying to me was better than telling me the truth. Why you trusted your neighbor with information you couldn't trust me with. Why you involved Aunt Margaret in a fictional emergency. Why you chose deception over honest communication when I called you upset about my canceled vacation. My dad leaned back in his chair, looking older than he had when I'd arrived. We were trying to protect you. From what? From knowing that you could afford a nice vacation. From understanding that we have different financial situations. From feeling happy for your good fortune. From feeling worse about your own situation, my mom said. You were already so disappointed about canceling your beach trip, and when you called us that day you sounded so sad. We didn't want to add to that by mentioning our cruise. But you didn't just not mention it, I said. You actively lied. You told me money was tight for you too, that you understood my struggles because you were facing similar financial challenges. You made me feel less alone in my disappointment by pretending we were all in the same boat. We thought it would help, my dad said. How could lying possibly help? How could making me believe we shared the same problems be better than just acknowledging that we had different circumstances? But you still supported me. My parents exchanged another look, and I could see them having some kind of silent conversation about how much to reveal or admit. The truth is, my mom said finally, we weren't sure how you'd react. You've always been sensitive about money, and we were afraid you might feel like we were being insensitive or showing off. Sensitive about money how? Well, you've always been careful about spending, always worried about having enough saved up. When you were younger, you used to get upset when we'd buy things for your brother that we couldn't buy for you at the same time. I stared at her. I was 8 years old, Mom. And those weren't about money, they were about fairness. When Marcus got a new bike and I got nothing, it wasn't because I was sensitive about money, it was because I was a kid who wanted to be treated equally. We know that now, my dad said. But I guess we still think of you as someone who worries a lot about financial stuff. I do worry about money, I said, because I have to. Because I work as a veterinary technician and live in a studio apartment and save $50 a month for vacation funds. But that doesn't mean I can't handle hearing about other people's good fortune, including yours. The room fell quiet again. Outside, the drizzle had turned into proper rain, pattering against the windows and creating the kind of gray atmosphere that made indoor conversations feel more intense. There's something else, I said, opening my folder and pulling out the notes from my conversation with Marcus. This isn't the first time you've done this. Marcus told me about last year when you said you couldn't help with his camera equipment because of unexpected house repairs. Then took a trip to Napa Valley the same weekend you were supposed to be dealing with contractors. Both my parents looked genuinely surprised. We never connected those two things, my mom said. Because you've created a pattern where you lie about your financial situation instead of having honest conversations about what you can and can't or will and won't do. Instead of just saying we can't help with the camera equipment because we've decided to prioritize our own vacation fund, you create fictional emergencies and pretend you're struggling too. My dad was nodding slowly, like pieces of a puzzle were falling into place in his mind. You're right, we have been doing that. But why? Why is lying easier than just being honest about your priorities and your circumstances? My mom looked down at her hands, twisting her new shell bracelet around her wrist. I think we felt guilty about having more financial flexibility than you kids do. Like we should either help you with everything or pretend we couldn't help at all. But there's a middle ground, I said. You can acknowledge that you have different circumstances without either feeling guilty about it or lying about it. You can say we're sorry you had to cancel your vacation, and we hope you understand that we're still taking ours. You can say we'd love to help with the camera equipment, but we've already allocated that money for other purposes. You can be honest about your situation without making it anyone else's fault or responsibility. The rain was getting heavier, creating a steady drumming sound on the roof that filled the pauses in our conversation. My parents looked like they were processing something difficult, working through implications they hadn't considered before. We really hurt you, didn't we? My mom said finally. Yes, you did, but not because you took a cruise. Because you lied to me about it, and because that lie revealed that you think I'm the kind of person who can't handle the truth about our different financial realities. We don't think that, my dad protested. Your actions say otherwise. You trusted Mrs. Rodriguez enough to share your excitement about the cruise, but you assumed I would react badly. You thought I was so immature and self-centered that I'd make your vacation about my disappointment. My mom was crying now, quiet tears that she wasn't trying to hide. We were wrong. We were so wrong about how to handle this, and we hurt you in ways we never intended. I know you didn't intend to hurt me, but impact matters more than intention, and the impact was that I felt deceived, excluded, and fundamentally misunderstood by the two people who should know me best. I pulled out one more piece of paper from my folder. I printed out your cruise itinerary. 14 days visiting 4 Hawaiian islands, ocean view suites, specialty dining, shore excursions. It sounds absolutely magical. My parents looked at the itinerary like it was evidence of a crime. I would have been genuinely happy for you if you'd told me the truth, I continued. I might have felt a little envious, sure, but mostly I would have been excited to hear about your adventures and see your photos and listen to your stories about snorkeling and sunset dinners and helicopter tours. We did take a helicopter tour, my dad said quietly. Over the volcano on the Big Island. It was incredible. I would have loved to hear about that. I still would if you want to share honestly now. My mom was still crying, but she was also nodding. We saw sea turtles while we were snorkeling in Maui.
Dozens of them, just swimming around like we were part of their world. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. That sounds amazing, Mom. I'm so glad you got to see that. We sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain and processing the weight of everything that had been said. My parents looked exhausted, like they'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. What happens now? My mom asked. Now we rebuild our relationship on honesty instead of deception. No more fictional emergencies, no more pretending you're struggling financially when you're not, no more assuming I can't handle the truth about our different circumstances. We can do that, my dad said. We want to do that. And maybe you could start by trusting me enough to share the good parts of your lives, not just the parts you think I can handle. I want to hear about your helicopter tours and your sea turtle encounters and your specialty dinners. I want to celebrate your good fortune even when my own situation is less ideal. My mom smiled through her tears. We have about 500 photos from the cruise. I'd love to see them, all of them. And next time you plan a vacation, I want to hear about it when you book it, not discover it accidentally in your spam folder. Over the next 2 hours they showed me photos from their cruise and told me stories about their adventures. The guilt and deception were gradually replaced by excitement and sharing. They talked about the food, the entertainment, the other passengers they'd met, the incredible views from their suite balcony. It was the conversation we should have had 3 weeks ago, and it felt like rebuilding something that had been broken. When I finally drove home that evening, I felt emotionally drained but also hopeful. We'd had the kind of difficult, honest conversation that many families avoid, and we'd come through it with a better understanding of each other. My parents had acknowledged their pattern of deception and committed to changing it. I'd expressed my feelings without attacking their character or their right to enjoy their good fortune. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Trust would take time to rebuild, and I suspected there would be more conversations needed as we all learned how to communicate more honestly. But it was a beginning, a foundation for a healthier family dynamic based on truth rather than protection. 3 months later, my parents called to tell me they were planning a long weekend in San Francisco for their birthday celebration. They were excited about it, and they wanted to share their excitement with me. They also offered to help me plan a small vacation of my own, not as charity but as a birthday gift. They genuinely wanted to give. I accepted both the shared excitement and the birthday vacation, because that's what families do when they trust each other with both their struggles and their joys. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it's complicated, even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it requires rebuilding everything you thought you knew about love and communication. The beach house in Delaware is still on my list for next year, but now it feels like a goal rather than a lost dream. And when I do take that vacation, I'll be able to share my excitement with people who've learned how to celebrate good fortune rather than hide it. That might be an even better gift than the vacation itself.
6 months after our confrontation, I was sitting in a coffee shop near the veterinary clinic when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Jessica, your dad and I want to take you somewhere special for lunch. Are you free this Saturday? We have something important to discuss." My stomach did a small flip. Important discussions in our family had historically meant either good news or complicated news, and given our recent history, I wasn't sure which to expect. But the tone felt different this time, warmer and more straightforward than the careful, guilt-laden messages I'd grown accustomed to receiving. Of course, I texted back. "Should I be worried?" "Not worried," she replied. "Excited." Saturday came with unusually warm weather for early spring, and my parents picked me up in my dad's truck, both of them wearing matching grins that made them look like conspirators planning something delightful. They drove us to a small seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and windows that opened onto the water. "This is nice," I said as we settled into our booth. "What's the occasion?" My dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "We've been doing some thinking since our conversation in January. About honesty, about family, about what we want our relationships to look like going forward." My mom nodded, looking nervous but determined. "We realized that part of why we kept secrets was because we'd never really learned how to include you and Marcus in our decisions, even the ones that affect the whole family." "Well," my dad continued, "we've been making choices about money and vacations and family time without ever asking what you kids might want or need. We just assumed we knew, and then when conflicts arose, we chose deception over communication." I waited, curious about where this was heading. My parents exchanged one of their wordless spousal conversations before my mom took over. "Your father and I have been talking about taking a family vacation together. All four of us. Somewhere none of us has been before. Somewhere we can make new memories without any baggage from past trips or canceled plans or secret cruises." My dad slid the envelope across the table. "We'd like to propose a week in Costa Rica. We found a place that offers wildlife tours, ziplining, beach time, and hiking. Different activities for different interests, but we'd all be together." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were brochures for an eco-lodge in Manuel Antonio, with photos of monkeys, tropical beaches, and canopy tours through rainforest. There was also a printed itinerary showing 7 days of optional activities, from guided nature walks to whitewater rafting to cooking classes featuring local cuisine. "This looks incredible," I said, flipping through the materials. "But I have to ask, can I actually afford my portion of this?" My mom smiled. "That's the other part of our proposal. Your father and I want to pay for the accommodations and flights as your combined birthday and Christmas gifts for this year. You'd only need to cover your spending money, meals we don't include, and any extra activities you want to add." "What about Marcus?" "We've already talked to him. He's excited about the photography opportunities, and he can afford his portion of the costs right now since his business has been doing well." I stared at the brochures, trying to process this unexpected development. "Why Costa Rica?" "Because none of us has been there," my dad said. "Because it offers something for everyone. Because it's the kind of place where we can focus on experiencing things together instead of worrying about who's paying for what or whether someone feels left out." And my mom added quietly, "Because we want to prove to ourselves and to you that we can plan something as a family, with complete honesty and openness from start to finish." The server came by to take our drink orders, giving me a moment to think. The proposal was generous, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of family bonding experience I would have said yes to immediately a year ago. But our recent history made me cautious about their motivations. "Can I ask you something honestly?" I said when the server left. "Of course, is this guilt? Are you doing this because you feel bad about the Hawaii situation, or because you genuinely want to travel together as a family?" My parents looked at each other again, and I could see them having another silent conversation about how much honesty this question deserved. "Both," my dad said finally. "We do feel guilty about how we handled Hawaii and we want to do better, but we also genuinely miss spending time together as a family, and we realized we've never taken a real vacation with you kids as adults. When Marcus and I were teenagers, family vacations were mostly about keeping us entertained and making sure we didn't kill each other in the car," I said. "This would be different." "Exactly. We want to see what it's like to travel together, when we all get to be ourselves, when we can have adult conversations about what we want to do and see and experience. My mom leaned forward, and we want to practice being honest about everything. Costs, expectations, concerns, excitement, all of it. No hidden agendas, no secret plans, no protecting anyone from information we think they can't handle. I looked at the brochures again, imagining ziplining through cloud forests with my family, watching my dad try to photograph wild sloths while my mom worried about him falling out of trees, sharing meals and stories and adventures with the people who'd raised me. It sounded wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. What if we don't all get along for a whole week? What if being together that much brings up old issues or creates new ones? Then we deal with it honestly, my dad said. We talk through problems instead of avoiding them or pretending they don't exist. What if I can't afford the spending money portion and have to limit what I do while you all participate in expensive activities? Then we adjust our plans to include things we can all afford, or we find ways to share costs that don't make anyone feel uncomfortable, my mom said. What if Marcus gets a great photography job offer and has to cancel at the last minute? Then we decide as a family whether to postpone, go without him, or find a way to reschedule, my dad said. But we make those decisions together, with all the information on the table. I realized they'd thought through the practical and emotional challenges more thoroughly than they'd ever done for previous family plans. This felt like people who'd learned something important about communication and were ready to practice it in real time. When would we go? We were thinking late fall, after the rainy season, but before the high tourist season, October or November, depending on everyone's schedules. That would give me months to save spending money and request time off work. It would also give our family time to continue rebuilding trust and practicing honest communication before we attempted a week-long adventure together. I have one condition, I said. My parents waited. If any problems or conflicts come up during planning or during the trip itself, we address them directly and immediately. No more protecting people from uncomfortable conversations, no more assuming we know how others feel, no more managing situations behind anyone's back. Agreed, my mom said. And if anyone needs to make changes or has concerns about costs or activities, we discuss it openly instead of letting people suffer in silence or make sacrifices they can't afford. Absolutely, my dad said. I looked at the brochures one more time, imagining howler monkeys and pristine beaches and family dinners where we all told the truth about our experiences. Then yes, I would love to go to Costa Rica with you. The smile that spread across my mom's face was brighter than any I'd seen since before the Hawaii discovery. My dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. There's one more thing, my mom said. We want to start having monthly family dinners. All four of us, rotating who hosts, just to practice staying connected and being honest with each other on a regular basis, instead of only when there's a crisis or a big announcement. Marcus already agreed to this. He suggested it actually. He said it would help him feel more connected to the family, now that his business keeps him traveling so much. Over lunch, we talked through the practical details of the Costa Rica trip and the monthly dinner plan. My parents showed me the research they'd done about flights and accommodations, the activities they'd found, the costs they'd calculated. Everything was transparent, with printed documentation and clear explanations of who was paying for what. It felt like interacting with different people. Not perfect people. They still occasionally slipped into protective or managing modes, but people who were genuinely trying to change ingrained patterns of communication and behavior. 3 weeks later, we had our first monthly family dinner at Marcus's apartment. He cooked, which was ambitious but ultimately successful, and we spent the evening sharing stories about work and travel and plans for the future. My parents talked openly about their retirement savings strategies and their hopes for more travel. Marcus described his latest photography projects and his concerns about the competitive market for wedding photographers. I talked about a promotion opportunity at the clinic, and my tentative plans to start taking night classes in veterinary practice management. It was the kind of conversation we'd never really had before. Honest, adult, mutually supportive without being overly protective. When my mom mentioned that she was nervous about ziplining in Costa Rica, Marcus immediately offered to research the safety records of different tour companies. When my dad expressed concern about the cost of our planned shore excursions, I suggested we prioritize the ones that were most important to each of us, instead of trying to do everything. By the time we boarded our flight to Costa Rica in November, we'd had 6 months of practicing direct communication and honest family dynamics. It wasn't perfect, we still occasionally fell back into old patterns, but it was dramatically better than the secret keeping and assumption making that had nearly damaged our relationships permanently. The trip itself was everything we'd hoped for, and several things we hadn't expected. My dad turned out to be naturally talented at wildlife photography and spent hours patiently waiting for the perfect shot of toucans and iguanas. My mom discovered she loved hiking and pushed us to attempt longer trails than any of us had originally planned. Marcus made friends with other travelers and ended up getting hired to photograph 2 destination weddings from contacts he made at our hotel. I found that I was good at navigating and planning, taking charge of logistics in ways that helped everyone feel more relaxed and spontaneous. We also had our first major family conflict in years, when my mom and I disagreed about whether to attempt a challenging canopy tour that I thought looked dangerous and she thought looked thrilling. Instead of avoiding the conflict or letting it fester, we talked it through over dinner, with my dad and Marcus helping mediate. We ended up compromising on a less extreme adventure that satisfied my safety concerns, while still giving my mom the adrenaline rush she was seeking. The fact that we could navigate disagreement without deception or withdrawal felt like a major victory for our rebuilt family dynamics. On our last night, sitting on the hotel balcony, watching sunset over the Pacific Ocean, my mom said something that crystallized the entire experience for me. I keep thinking about how much energy we used to waste on managing information and protecting feelings and trying to control how everyone reacted to things. This is so much easier and more fun, Marcus added. I feel like I actually know you all now, instead of just knowing the versions of yourselves you thought I could handle. My dad nodded. I wish we'd learned this lesson years ago. Think of all the conversations we could have had, all the problems we could have solved instead of avoided. But maybe we needed to make those mistakes to get here, I said. Maybe the Hawaii situation had to happen for us to realize how much our communication patterns were hurting our relationships. As we flew home the next week, I reflected on how much had changed since that day I'd discovered their cruise confirmation in my mom's spam folder. We'd gone from a family that prioritized harmony over honesty to one that chose truth even when it was uncomfortable. We'd learned that protecting people from information often caused more harm than sharing it. We'd discovered that trust grows stronger when it's tested and rebuilt rather than when it's simply assumed. Most importantly, we'd proven to ourselves that families can change, that harmful patterns can be broken, and that it's never too late to choose better ways of loving each other. The beach house in Delaware is still on my list for this summer. But now, instead of being a solo retreat from family disappointment, it's going to be a celebration of personal goals achieved and relationships rebuilt. My parents will know where I'm going, what I'm planning, and how excited I am about my week of ocean views and morning coffee on screened porches. And when I get back, I'll have stories to share with people who've learned that the best way to love someone is to trust them with the truth, even when it's complicated, even when it's imperfect, and even when it requires admitting you were wrong about everything you thought you knew about protection and family and the courage it takes to be genuinely honest with the people who matter most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.